Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to show you how to get a hard-hitting, modern metal drum mix. We're going to take our raw drums from this, to this. So I'm going to show you how to incorporate drum samples into your mix and how to get the best out of those samples. So we're going to be using Trigger 2 for all our drum samples, and I'm going to show you some little tips with Trigger 2 on how to get the absolute best out of your drum samples. Okay, for starters, let's have a look at the drum bus. What do we got here? So we've got a 2 dB cut at 50 Hertz with a low shelf, getting rid of a little bit of subby low end rumble. And we've got a minus 2.5 dB cut at 190 Hertz. So cleaning up a little bit of muddiness in the drum mix here. So we probably had a little bit of a build up going on there that we needed to deal with. Now, if you wanted to make this sound a little bit tighter, you could put a high pass filter in here. I've just got something like this rolled up to about 50 Hertz. Have a listen to what this does to the kit. So I guess it depends what kind of kick sound you want. If you don't want as much sort of that low end rumble and energy, then a high pass filter is all you need to kind of clean that up and get it a little bit tighter and punchier sounding. But I'm looking for that kind of rumbly low end double kick, so we're going to leave that off for now. Next thing up, some drum bus compression. So we've got a 0.3 attack and a 0.1 release, so very aggressive. And we're just doing a 3:1 ratio, and then we just dial in a little bit of this threshold to get it moving a couple of dB. So just really controlling the kit, not letting much through with that fast attack. Not doing anything on the high pass filter, no makeup gain, just sort of getting some control over the kit here. And then following that up with a limiter, I like to use the L3LL Ultra Maximizer by Waves, and I have it on the Cozy and Warm profile. This is sort of like a go-to setting for me on the drum bus. Just getting a couple of dB of compression there, reining in any spikes or peaks that are coming through. Okay, so that is our drum bus. Okay, so let's just talk about these three sends here. We have an attack, which is a slow compressor, a smash, which is like a fast 1176 style compressor, so fast attack, fast release, and then we've got our snare reverb, which is also being sent back into the 1176 bus here on the smash bus. Have a listen to the kit, what it sounds like when we take these on and off. These are our parallel processing. So it's really bringing the punch and the aggression to this drum sound. So on our attack send, we have Slate Digital's VMR, and this is just a bit of a go-to setting for me for any time I want to add attack and aggression to the drums. We've just got the FG bomber on the tight mode, which is just a bit of transient shaping, so adding a little bit of punch to our transient. So we just have a bell boost at 5.5K, about 7 dBs, and then a bell boost at about 114 Hertz, about 5 dBs. So we're giving it a little scoop, and then we're going to add a VCA compressor with kind of a medium slow attack, medium fast release, a little bit grabby sounding. That sounds like this. So we've got mostly snare being sent to this, a bit of kick, and then a little bit of toms, and then less cymbals. So there's a little bit of cymbals in there, like overheads and room, but mostly it's snare and kick, and then a little bit of toms. I like to play with the amount of kick that I send into this, because sometimes I find the kick gets a little too aggressive, and I like to dial that back and just play with the level of the kick versus how much parallel compression is going on to get the right blend. But as far as the snare goes, it sounds good just slamming that snare. Now, on our smash bus, this is where we're just going to completely annihilate the transient. So we're using the UAD 1176AE, and we've got it on an 8:1 ratio, fastest attack, fastest release. And before the compressor, I just have a stock EQ here with a wide bell at around 5K. So just adding a little bit of presence into it. pretty aggressive. So it's just smashing it up. Hear what it sounds like with our attack and our smash blended together. So they go well together. Okay, and then our snare reverb, we just have any snare signals like snare top, snare bottom, snare samples, all being sent to this. And it's just our UAD Lexicon 224 on the snare plate preset, and we've just added an EQ after it, and we're just pulling down about 7 dBs at 200 hertz with a wide-ish bell. So just pulling out a lot of that fundamental note that's in the snare that might actually end up getting a little bit muddy by having a bunch of reverb in here. So we kind of want the brightness and excitement, but we don't want to get it too woofy in the low end. And that's being sent to our smash bus with the 1176, which sounds like this. So it just makes it pretty exciting. Make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. If you guys want to show a little bit of support to the channel, a great way of doing that is sharing these videos with your audio mates. So if you got a friend who's into this stuff, make sure you hit that share link and share it with some friends. Now let's have a look at our individual channels here. So on my kick, this is what it sounds like completely raw. So we've got the Brainworks SSL 4000E, go-to plugin for me as well. You probably watched a bunch of my videos and I just grab this all the time, but it's just such a Swiss Army knife. So you don't need 1,000 different plugins. You can use essentially a handful of plugins to get good sounding mixes. And I've learned the hard way after buying 1,000 plugins that I don't need them all. So here we go. We've got a bell setting at 8K, and I want to bring out a little bit more of the tick in the kick sound. So got a 2 dB boost there, and then we're taking out a little bit of the hardness in the kick around 3K, and that's sort of like a sharper bell and minus about 3.8 dBs, and then a bit of a cut around 532 hertz of a sharp bell, so that's minus 3.6 dB, and then a boost with our bell in the low frequencies at 57 hertz. So we're trying to bring out a little bit of that rumble in the kick, so that's about a 6.8 dB boost. Now we've made sure that the pre-dynamic button is pushed in here, so it's going to be EQing before our compressor. And then we've just got a 3:1 ratio, medium fast release on the compressor, and then we just sort of dial this in to get about 3 to 6 dBs of compression at any given time. And then on our expander, we're dropping this down about 36 dB. So the kick is going to be getting gated, expanded generously. Fairly quick release, 0.4 seconds. We might even be able to like quicken that up a bit, maybe 0.3, and a fast attack. Just taking a lot of the hardness out of the kick and giving it a bit more energy in the low end and a little bit more airiness to the top end. Then we're just following this up with a tiny bit of clipping. I generally don't like the sound of clippers on anything with a lot of low end in it. The distortion starts to get a little bit nasty to me. So we're just doing a tiny bit of clipping. Just reining it in. And then we're just following it up with an EQ at the end, just a little cut at 4,380 hertz. Just taking a little bit more hardness out of the kick. All right, now let's have a look at our kick out signal. So we are boosting generously at 57 hertz again. So we're bringing up about 7 to 8 dB here. And we've got the pre-dynamic button in again, so just make note of that. And we're doing a big cut at around 530 hertz, so 5 dB cut here. And we're just trying to make this get a little bit more subby sounding. We've got pretty much the same compressor and expander settings for the kick in as we do for our kick out here. So yeah, makes it nice and thumpy, nice and tight. Generally, I like the kick out roughly around 10 dBs quieter than the kick in. Depending on the sound, like if you want something thumpier, you'd have it louder. But for something like this, where we don't need too much of this sub energy, just kind of have it sort of like around 10 dBs lower than our kick in. That's just not a rule of thumb, but it's just like a nice starting point. Okay, now let's have a look at our snare drum. Okay, first of all, Pro MB dealing with our cymbal bleed. You've heard me talk about this 1,000 times, but for anyone new, just got a expander on a high shelf here. So we've got an expand mode, and our range is about -18 on this track. So we've got the high frequencies turned down 18 dBs, and anytime the snare hits, it opens it up, lets the brightness through on that top end, and then it drops it back down. So we're going to have a fast attack, basically fastest release. I've got 7% here, just so hang on a tiny little bit. It's magic. So yeah, if you want to copy these settings, that's them there. Let's take a screen grab and add them to your Pro MB. Okay, and then next up, we've got the Brainworks SSL again, boosting a generous high shelf at 8K, about 11 dBs here. Bit of a boost at 6.5K, about 6.5 dBs, pretty generous again. And that's a fairly wide bell. We've got it in the brown mode, so our brown face EQ. And then we have a bell at 200 Hertz, just boosting about 7 dBs. This is a fairly high tuned snare. Pre-dynamics again on the EQ, so EQ before compression. And we're going to do a fairly fast release, 4:1 ratio, get this going about 3 to 6 dB. And then we got our expander, so dropping about 20 dBs. And a fairly fast release on this as well, because we don't want too much of the cymbal bleed to come through. So it's pretty aggressive, it's kind of choppy, but in the mix, it sounds fine. Next up, we have a bit of transient designer. So we're adding a little bit of attack and a little bit of sustain. So we're just trying to make this all just hit harder. So this is the SPL Transient Designer Plus. So it's doing a little bit, it's nothing crazy, just adding a little bit more oomph to it and a little bit more dirty sustain afterwards. Okay, and just lastly, a little bit of clipping just to rein it all in. A little bit more generous than the kick, but the snare being a bit more mid-range and high frequency, it seems to handle being clipped a little bit better than something with a bit more low energy in it, like a kick. Okay, then let's have a look at our snare bottom. What's this sound like unprocessed? It's kind of honky, a lot of mid-range in it. So basically, massive boost, 11.4 dBs at 7.8 kilohertz, basically 8K on a high shelf. And then a bit of a cut around 3K, 3.1K, minus 4 dBs there. And then another cut around 1.3K, just getting rid of some of that honkiness out. So taking out 2.6 dBs there. And then a bit of a boost into 200 Hertz, 5 dBs there. So we're trying to just scoop this up a little bit, add some nice airiness to the snare wires, and then a little bit of weight to that low end. Got a fast attack on the compressor, fast release, and I played with the mix knob about 43% here, and we've got the ratio really high, so it's really slamming compressor, basically a limiter kind of thing going on here. The expander's not really doing anything at the moment, and the EQ is in pre-dynamic as well. Pretty snappy now, and that's what we want. We want to hear the snap of those wires, and I have that sitting under the snare. Similar deal to the kick, it's usually about 10 dBs lower than the snare top that I find. I like that blend with the snare bottom. Now, let's have a look at some toms. So this is our raw rack tom. Okay, kind of... don't you just love the sound of raw toms? Okay, so let's clean this up. So we've got a big bell boost at 9.5K. So we're just gonna add some top end smack to this. Bit of a cut around 3.7K, just 1 dB cut there, just taking out a little bit of the hardness on the stick sound. And then a bit of a cut at 886 Hertz. So this is like that honky mid-range that sounds a bit yuck. That stuff, yuck. So a bit of a cut there. A little boost around 110 Hertz. So we've got 1 dB here with a bell. Pre-dynamic EQ again, and then into some compression. We've got about a 3:1 ratio here on the compressor. Fairly fast release and a couple of dBs of compression happening. Then we have the expander with about a 30 dB range. So it's just going to drop away nicely, and a medium fast release. It's kind of like 0.5 seconds. We don't want the sustain of the toms to linger around too long. smacky. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is add a limiter or some clipping. Now I thought I'd show you both. I didn't really love the sound of the clipper on here. I think I prefer the way the limiter rounds it out as opposed to the hardness of the clipper sound. So I went with the limiter instead. But I thought I'd put that there just to show you the differences. And then lastly, some Pro MB, basically the same setting that our snare is on, just to deal with any cymbal bleed. And we just play with that threshold to make sure it's only really reacting to the tom hits. All right, and then our floor tom. Bit of a bell boost at 10.7K, and we're boosting 12 dBs. Super generous there. And 4.4K hertz, we're doing a cut at 3.7 dBs, taking some of that hardness out of the mids. And then an 8 dB cut at around 886 hertz. So we've got some pretty big moves going on here, pretty wild. Then we've got a 2 dB boost around 110 hertz. And then we've got the pre-dynamic button in again, EQing before compression. The compressor and expander settings are the same as the rack tom. Cool, tidies it up nicely. Then we've got our limiter into Pro MB, which is just the same settings as the rack tom. Really cleans it up there nicely. Okay, on our close mic with our hats, all we have is a stock EQ here, and I'll just take you through what's going on. Got a massive cut, minus 12.5 dBs at 117 hertz with a low shelf. So instead of doing a high pass filter, we've just got a big low shelf cut, taking out a lot of the low end build up and rumble here that we don't need so much of. And then we're doing a bit of a cut at 362 hertz, 5.5 dBs cut, getting rid of some of that woofy cymbal resonance. It sounds like this. And we've got a 4 dB cut at 3.7K. So this is like some harshness in the upper mids. And then we're taking out some of those ultra high frequencies in the hats with a high shelf at around 10K, minus 5 dBs of that. Just kind of warming them up a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of overly airy hi-hats. I find they sound kind of like cheap and fake. So it just tidies it up a little bit. Hi-hat mics never sound very pretty on their own. So in the mix, we just kind of want to take away any elements in that are going to cause clutter or make things sound worse than necessary. So we're just going to pull out anything from the hat's mic or boost anything that sounds good just to make it sit in there nicer. Our ride mic, there's not really many sections where the ride is played. Okay, so we found it. There's one little ride section here. Some little bell hits and fun things going on there. But that's about all the ride does in this track. So once again, just a low shelf, minus 15 dBs, just pulling it down around 100 hertz, just to get rid of low end rumble. But we're kind of leaving where the fundamental of the snare is, because we want to leave a little bit of body of the snare in the close mics of the hats, and the ride helps to just beef up the snare a little bit. There's always a little bit of resonance in the ride mic around 300 hertz. If you have a little listen to this. So we've just got a big cut, minus 6.7 dBs at 312 hertz, just taking away a little bit of muddiness, and then a little bit of a cut at 670 hertz, minus 2 dBs, just to get rid of some mid-range buildup. Takes away that woofiness. We're left with a clearer cymbal sound. We should probably just automate that in, really, because we don't need that cymbal for anything else. Next up, overheads. So we've got both our overheads being sent to a group here so we can process them together. And then we just have a stock EQ. So we're just going with the method of high passing our overheads to take away a lot of the low end to leave room for the close mics like the kicks and the snares and the toms. We don't want a lot of low end energy from our overheads. So we're high passing up to 167 hertz. And then we've got a low shelf cut at 300 hertz, which is minus 5.8 dBs. And then we've got a high shelf boost at 5K, 2.4 dBs there. A little cut at 6.7K, minus 2 dBs, kind of undoing that boost a little bit. Some sort of harsh resonance in the cymbals. So that's our first EQ, and that sounds like this. So it takes out a lot of that kick and snare low end energy, and it focuses these mics more on our cymbals now. Then we've got a follow-up EQ. So this next EQ I added a little bit later as I felt I needed to go back and just tweak it a little bit, but I didn't want to touch my other EQ. So I just grabbed another EQ and we're just doing a cut at 530 Hertz, minus 4 dBs. So a little bit of that honky snare stuff that sort of like muds it up a little bit. And then a little bit of a cut at 10K. So pulling it back down 1.3 dBs just felt like it was getting a little too sizzly. So it really fins it up, makes it nice and airy. We're just following this up with our SSL channel strip, not doing any EQ. All we're doing here basically is a little bit of compression. So we've got a fairly fast release, 4:1 ratio, and just a couple of dBs of gain reduction. Cool, and that just makes our overheads nice and bright and airy and thin, and leaves room for all these close mics and everything that's going on. Okay, now our room mics. Sounds pretty cool. So we've got a pair of R88 ribbon mics, and on these we are just doing a little bit of a cut in the low mids, just to kind of take away a bit of that room sound that gets in there and just sort of scoop them out a touch. Tightens them up a little bit. And then on our ambient room mic, so this is like down the hallway kind of thing, just got a couple little moves here dealing with some low end build up. So just a low shelf cut from 185 Hertz, minus 2.5 dB, and a little bit of a bell cut at 169 Hertz, minus 4.2 dBs. So kind of dealing with a little bit of frequency build up in the kick and the snare here. And then we've just got a cut at 540 Hertz, 1.6 dB. Just some honky mid-range stuff. Little cut at 4.2K. Just some harshness in the cymbals. And then our blend of our room mic sounds like this. Then we're going to do a similar thing that we did to our overheads, is we're just going to take out a bunch of that low end in the room sound. So high pass filter up to 156 Hertz, 24 dB octave, and then a little cut in our low mids, 490 Hertz, minus 3.2 dBs. Focus it more on the snare than opposed to the low end energy of the kick, which we don't really need a lot of that in there, as we're getting a lot of that from our close mics. Especially once we add our samples in, we're not going to need a whole lot of low end energy from our room mics. After that, we've got another little staple plugin of mine, the LX480 Essentials, and this is just on a plate with a 0.8 second release, and we're just pulling out a tiny little bit of the ultra high frequencies, and we're just blending this in about 62% dry, 38% wet. Makes it sound like it's in a bigger room space. So after that, we're going into the SPL Transient Designer Plus, and we're going to add a little bit of attack and then a bunch of sustain. We're trying to bring out this room sound a bit more. So it's subtle, but it's still just adding a little bit more energy to it. Okay, so that is all of our natural drums. Let's have a listen to what these sound like. So it's sounding pretty cool. Now let's just beef this up with some drum samples. Okay, so if we want to add drum samples, the best plugin you can use for this is Trigger 2. Now we're just going to highlight our kick track, press Command D, press Option and drag down. And there we have duplicated our track. From there, you just go back to your mixer and you just erase everything off that channel strip. So click up the top and go remove all effect plugins. Boom, you got a clean slate now. And then you come down to Steven Slate, Trigger 2, mono to stereo, and load that up. Now I've already done this, so we're going to jump over to the already made samples up here. But that is how you would go about getting started. Okay, so for our kick sound, I've chosen one of my samples from the Spinlight Trigger 2 Volume 1 sample pack, and this is the Clickety Clack. So it's just a version of my Ludwig kick with a lot of aggression to it. It might have been done with my Lowboy beaters, which are hard wood beaters, which sound really cool. Double clicked on the Start Me Up preset, and that loads up with a pretty nice blend, but then you can just go ahead and tweak it. And I think I might have added a little bit more room sound into it. It's got a nice amount of attack to it, this one. I've got an EQ after this, which I just pulled down 1 dB shelf at 7.4K and then pulled out 2.7 dBs of 6K. So just taking out a little bit of attack on this, especially once it's going into our parallel compression. Sometimes that just brings out more brightness sometimes than you need when you load up a sample. So we're just pulling back a little bit of that just to kind of warm the kick up a tiny bit, but we still need that aggression there. And that's it. That's all I have on that. We're just sending that into the parallel compressions, the attack, and the smash. So we've got a bit more attack than smash on this one. Okay, next up, we loaded up our trigger setting for our snare. And for this one, we've loaded up my Yamaha Recording Custom Brass. Now this is a multi-velocity snare, so you can see it's got the MV here. And that means that softer hits are going to be played softer, and there's a wide range of velocities in this sample. So besides being multi-sampled with a round robin, it's also multi-velocity, which is great. Adds a lot more authenticity and organicness to the snare sound. Okay, and we've just loaded up the preset and then tweaked these settings a little bit. Now what's cool about this snare is I just love the sustain on it. The ring in the snare, the ping, I love that. So the first plugin I've loaded up for this channel is the UAD API 550A, and just doing a 2 dB boost at 10K. So just adding a little bit more snap to the top end. And then we're following that up with our Transient Designer, which is a bit of a theme on this mix. A little bit of attack, a little bit of sustain, just a little boost of both to add a little bit more energy to the snare. And then our EQ on the end. So couple of things going on here. We're just pulling out a little bit of low shelf here, about 150 hertz. So doing a minus 2.5 dB cut here, accentuating the fundamental frequency a little bit more, 266 hertz, so plus 2.1 dB, and then a little cut at 432 hertz, so a minus 2 dB cut here, just like cleaning up those low mids a little bit, and then a little cut at 5.5K, little harshness in the snare, so taking out a tiny bit of air with a low shelf at 17K, and that sounds like this. Love that snare sound. So a couple more samples from the Spinlight trigger pack. We've got the Ludwig Maple 12-inch rack tom. This is just another preset that's loaded up. Now have a look here on the tune. I've tuned this up 10. This is pretty important when using samples, is you want to choose samples that align with the tuning of the real drums, especially if you're trying to like blend them together. It sounds pretty weird if you pick a tom that is in a different tuning to the tom that you're triggering it off and play them at the same time. It just sounds a little bit nasty. You want to make sure that they are in the same pitch. So our rack tom, let's have a listen to it. Okay, let's have a listen to our sample. Let's have a listen to what it sounded like before I pitched it up. It's kind of discordant. Hear that higher pitch on the natural tom, and then the sample was a little bit lower. So what I'd normally do is solo these together, solo that close mic, and then tune it up until it sounds like we're getting into that sweet spot. "10 to 12 in there is like a good range, so let's go 11. Now they blend nicely. And then after that, we just have our SSL channel strip and just a small boost at 8K. So we're just doing a 3 dB boost of high shelf just to add a little bit more attack to this tom sound. Sounding good, great tom sounds. And then on our floor tom, similar deal. We've just loaded up the Ludwig Maple 14-inch and then had a listen to the tuning and decided we needed to take it down -14. And that sounds like this together with our natural tom. And then similar deal, following it up with the SSL channel strip, and we're just doing a boost of about 6 dBs on that 8K high shelf. And altogether, it sounds like this. So you can hear when we take the samples out, it's a nice natural sound. When we add the samples in, it's just this larger than life drum sound, which is what we want to get that modern metal drum sound. Now let me just show you a couple of quick little tips for some parameters within Trigger 2 to get the best out of your samples. Let's have a look at the kick to start with. What you want to do is go click on View Curves. Now, this is where we can set the attack, sustain, and release. Now, it's pretty important to play with these settings to really dial in that perfect kick sound. Because if you want a short, sustained kick sound, but your sample is ringing, then you need to come in here and dial it back and tighten it up. It's basically just like gating it, setting that release to exactly what you want to hear. Now, I typically like a fairly short kick sound. I don't want it to be rumbling with low-end frequencies for too long after the initial hit. So I've got this dialed into 0.01 seconds for the sustain and then 0.37 seconds. And that sounds like this for the kick. So we've done the same settings for the sub and then left everything else as is. So we just want these close mics not to give too much low end energy rumble after that initial hit. Keeps the kick sounding really tight. So you can play around those parameters to find a nice tight kick sound. But I find that ultra fast sustain time and then you just play with the release time gets you really good results. And similar deal, if you've got a snare that rings, you might want to play with the sustain and the release time on this. So for example, the Yamaha Recording Custom is a brass snare. It's got a lot of ring. And when I tracked these samples, I made sure it was open to capture that sound. So by playing with the release here, we can set exactly how much ring we want to hear. For this track, I like to hear a lot of ring, so we've got a 2.23 seconds. Same with the toms, go in, play with that release time so that you don't get too much low end rumble hanging around after the hits. I have it set to 0.6 seconds, so basically gating it like I did on the natural toms, but we're just doing it here in Trigger with the release. Okay, now some other quick little tips to get the best out of your drum samples. Let's find a nice dynamic section. So we had a bit of a snare roll here that wasn't being picked up by Trigger. No, it sounds kind of choppy. There's something missing there. So Trigger's not picking up everything we want it to. And that's mostly just to do with this detail setting here. Generally, I like to set this fairly high so that it doesn't get picked up by annoying little like cymbal transients or things that sneak into the snare that trigger a false snare hit. So generally, I keep this quite high. Now, if I feel like this comes along, all we have to do is automate the detail knob to duck down enough so that it captures this fill. So for example, we've just got this pulled down now. This is our detail knob. You have a look, detail knob drops down, gets nice and tight. Have a listen while it's playing. See, it's picked up all those snares there. How do I get to that? Well, the quickest and easiest way to ever get to anything that you're trying to automate is to put your track into touch, press play, and then just touch that setting. So we're just going to touch the detail knob here, move it a little bit while it's playing, and it's going to just make some automation for us. You see that? It's just made that, so we can just highlight that and delete it. But now we've got our automation here. Now you just have to press A to open up automation mode. And even here in this little tab here, you can go into all your plugins and parameters. Now, Trigger 2 has like 1,000 parameters in here. So if you open that, just type in detail or DE, and it takes you down to detail down the bottom, which is the one you want. And then you can write it in. You can just manually write this stuff in, and it's always good to look at Trigger 2 while you do it so you can visually see what's happening, to make sure that it's picking up all those little things that you want. So for example, over here, we've got a big build up, snare drops right down. Okay, so I've had to automate the detail right down here and then bring it up. And the other thing I had to automate though to make sure this works properly is the sensitivity. So because it's getting softer, these notes don't get picked up as much if your sensitivity is low. Now we don't want our sensitivity super high all the time because you get false triggers. So this is where if you have a dynamic section, you might need to automate these settings. So you have a look at the sensitivity knob when it drops down, really high sensitivity, we've gone up to 84%. And then I taper that back off as we get back into our louder hits. I have also played around with the input volume. So how much volume is being fed into trigger, which is useful for setting a good amount of level coming in, and then you can set your detail and all that stuff to get your snares hitting at the velocity that you want to hear them hit at. But also by playing with that input volume, you can really get this dynamic section to come through nicely with your drum samples. So that's our input volume, that's our sensitivity, and just watch all these parameters on here as it plays through. So pretty cool. You might be like, oh, that's a bit of work, but it's not really. Once you get used to this stuff, it's just a matter of like, oh yeah, click, click, drag, drag, drag. You know, you can get it done pretty quick, and you can make that build up sound way more authentic and get all those little extra notes in there that were previously being missed by trigger. I think there's a lot of people who probably don't do this, and they just like let the triggers come in halfway through when it picks up, and you can hear it. It just doesn't sound normal. So by doing these little automations, you can keep that triggered sound going all the way through, but keep the dynamics as well. And that is how we got from this to this. So that took a bit longer than I thought it would actually. There's a lot going on there, but that is how I achieved such a big, punchy, dynamic, modern metal drum mix. Hope you like the sound of these Spinlight drum samples. And if you do, make sure you check that description link below and go grab yourself a copy of the Spinlight Trigger 2 Volume 1 sample pack. I think it's got 11 kicks, 19 snares and 18 toms. Loads of good stuff in it to get your drum sounding awesome, and they work great in loads of genres. If you guys want to know about how to deal with dynamic vocals in a mix and compressing them so they don't sound over compressed, make sure you hit that link to the next video.